There we go. Hello. All right, so we're gonna wait a few minutes for people to join in here. So bear with me for a minute. Since this is a webinar, I cannot see or hear you, so bear with me with that. At the end, there will be a function so you guys can ask questions or use the chat, and I will be monitoring that. So we're just gonna wait a quick minute, and I'll repeat this stuff once we get some more people to join. Okay. So my name is Will, and I'm been working here at Chile for about a year now, a little under a year. Joined earlier. So I work in the horticulture sales department here. So I cover annuals, perennials, indoor houseplants, and of course, edible gardening, as well as being an avid gardener at home on my free time in the summer and spring seasons. So I want to take my mask off for this so you guys can hear me a little better. So it's a socially distanced room here, so I'm not breaking any protocol or anything around that. So let's see, we are filling up here. That's good. Perfect. Just gotta wait for a few more people. So I hope you guys are having a good day today. So everyone's staying inside and having a good time there and excited to learn about some gardening and indoor plants. And then some of the products that I do cover today, I did put them on a little handout. So you guys, if you are interested, you can see the handout and you can see which products I used. So that way you don't have to worry about asking me which products those are. So those will all be sent to you via email. And if you do not get them via email, feel free to reach out to the hello@Chalet Nursery email and we'll be able to send that to you. So, and I'll send that email towards the end and repeat that at the end of the presentation as well for you guys. Oh, perfect. All right. So you can also check the email that you did receive last night. And if you guys had not pre-registered and did not get that email about that, do not worry. We can also take care of that at the end as well. So just drop them in the comments or the chats at the end. I'll respond to those. So let's see here. All right. So look at some of these questions. So I will be covering the use of heat pads in the presentation. So Marion, that was a great question. And thank you for the other ones there. All right, I'm gonna share my screen now. Oh, wrong one there. Give me 1 second there. There we go. Yeah, oh, there we go, perfect. Thank you, now I'm gonna share that. I clicked the wrong button on that one, so. Perfect. All right. So I will not be able to see the chat function until the end of the PowerPoint. So anytime you guys have questions, just feel free to use that. And then at the end, I will check that and we can cover that. So without further ado, I'm going to begin. So today's topic is edible gardening. So just a brief little overview of topics that I'm going to cover today. So the first off is we're going to cover starting from seed. So this is going to be kind of what you need to get started with seeds. So like grow lights, containers, seed varieties, lighting, heat pads. Then we're going to move into kind of raised beds, so more of the outside stuff. What do I need to put in a raised bed? What plants grow good in raised beds? And then we're going to move into composting, so store-bought composting, or if you do want to start making compost on your own at home, we're going to cover that as well. And we're going to cover the basic of composting, such as browns and greens, ratios, all that stuff that's tied in there. And we'll move into containers. So if you are either in a small like apartment, you want to container that grow them in containers, or if you just want to have them in the backyard and grow them in addition doing your raised beds. I've done raised beds and containers both in the past. Containers I've grown like herbs in them, or I've even grown tomatoes as well. And then we'll move into some garden care. So this is basic stuff such as pruning your plants so they do kind of get a little bit overgrown. And we'll also go into the main topic of weeding, which everyone who gardens understands the burden and hassle of having to weed all the time. And then finally, we're going to close out with some pests and diseases that are covered. So first topic, starting from seed. So some of the benefits from starting from seed, personally, I like it because it allows you to grow a larger amount of seeds at one time. So if you were to go into the garden center and pick up your vegetables, you're only get like 3 or 4 of them in the little containers, which is great if you want to do a small garden. But if you did want to kind of try growing your own and starting from there, you can kind of grow your own. And the average seed packet, I think, was covering about like 25 seeds. So we carry a few different seed packets here, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment. But they allow you to kind of grow large amount of seeds on a smaller scale there. Also having a part in the growing process. So I kind of like the plant. This is just in general planting, like house plants as well. I like planting them and watching them root and then kind of grow and expand. And then at the end, actually with these, you can harvest the fruit and the vegetables there, all the edible stuff. And it's kind of a fun thing you can use for cooking. Also during the pandemic, it's kind of a nice little thing to keep busy with. So you can start indoors, watch them grow. Also, if you have kids around, it's kind of fun to always start seeds. I know my family would always garden. We put the seeds in little egg cartons. It's a nice little small, low cost way if you want to start gardening with children. And then also they have a wider variety of seeds. So like I said, you go to pick out the plants, they'll have like Roma tomatoes or cherry tomatoes. Seeds allow you kind of get a little bit more funky with that. So I kind of looked at our seeds and found some unique brands. So starting off are 5 different color radishes. So they come in different colors like pink, yellow, purple, and they're still grown the same way as regular radishes. They just kind of have a different, more funky color combo there. Let's see. Some other ones that I found here are purple cauliflower. So I've seen these in the grocery store and you kind of grow these from seeds. That's a unique one. And then the last one I found is my personal favorite one are the rainbow carrots or the purple sun. So these are purple carrots, and as you can see, the little orange and yellow on the inside. Just something if you want to kind of grow and be a little more abstract with your gardening. So the essentials. So what do I need when starting from seed? So from seed starting mix is definitely what you want to use. And seed starting mix is different than your regular garden soil because it's going to be a little more looser. It's going to be a mix of like a yucca extract, perlite, and all those loose stuff that makes soil really loose so the plant's roots can kind of break through that easier. So the brand that I use here, which I'll show you, I have a little demonstration later on, is the Espoma Organic Seed Starting Mix. And this is a nice loose one, like I said, so it allows for the seeds, once they have germinated, for the roots to break through. Some seeds, of course. So the seeds for the demonstration that I'll be planting with are some pepper seeds. And on the packet, it should tell you how many weeks it takes for them to germinate, how long it's going to take, and how long you want to put them outside for. So definitely always read the packet because each seed's going to be a little bit different depending on the climate there and depending on which variety you choose. Some growing containers. So you can pretty much grow seeds in anything. You can use the plastic cell trays that you see at the greenhouses. You can use biodegradable little trays like these guys here, which you can plant directly into the ground, which is really nice. Or if you want to be a little bit more sustainable and eco-friendly, if you have like old egg cartons laying around your house, you can use those. Old yogurt containers, pretty much anything that can hold a little bit of dirt and has some adequate drainage that you can add will be great for starting seeds. Also grow lights. So I have a little slide about grow lights. That's for if you don't have enough light or if you want to use supplemental lighting. So if you're like growing them in your basement or in a shed, you can use grow lights. Otherwise, a south-facing window will be just as fine getting that light. Spray bottles for watering. I like to keep my seeds kind of moist. If you dry them out, they're not going to grow. I like to be kept moist, not too soggy though. So just kind of keep an eye, and that's going to vary depending on the temperature in your house. So after a few days, you'll be able to get a pretty good feel about the temperature in the room and how fast it takes the soil to dry out. So you can just watch that. You can know dry soil is kind of that brittly grayish color. You want to try to keep that nice, even, like wet, moist, dark, earthy looking color. Mm-hmm. Changing. Give me 1 second there.
Oh, resume share it wasn't sharing.
Oh.
She's stuck in
Well, let's see. Okay, perfect. So now hopefully you guys can see that. I'll back up a slide or two just in case it did not share. So, oops, well, it's not letting me back up. Oh, there you go. Okay, perfect. So this is the seed right before. So here's the main one, starting from seed. And then this one just kind of goes over the benefits that I touched on. So how you can buy larger amounts of seeds you can grow them inside and be a part of the growing process, as well as the wider variety of seed choices. So I'm not sure if you guys were able to see the seeds that I showed before, but real quick, I'll really run through them again. So when you're growing from seeds, you can kind of have more of a funkier variety. So we have some radish seeds here, like I showed before. So they come in kind of different colors than your usual radishes. So some whites, yellows, and reds. Over here with the purple cauliflower. So a little bit different than regular cauliflower. This guy should be pretty fun to grow, and you can also kind of show this off and be great to show the neighbors and everything. And then my personal favorite one are the purple carrots. So they're that nice deep purple color, and they have the orange inside. So very unique when growing. Of course, you don't have to grow unique seeds. You can just grow your regular run-of-the-mill plants as well. It's all personal preference. So this is the slide that I was just on. So like I said before, the seed starting mix here, the spoma seed starting mix there, which is a lot more looser than your traditional soil, which allows the plants to break through there and root a lot easier. Just whatever seeds you would like. You can start with just one packet of seeds, or you can do multiple, like different, like 12 packs and plant them in larger quantities. That is up to you. The growing container. So this is the disposable growing containers that I like, which I'll be using in the demonstration. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. Also grow lights, so along supplemental light, and then spray bottle for watering. And then finally, we're all caught up now with heat pads. So I know we had a comment about that earlier. So I do recommend using a heat pad, and you want to kind of start that off in the beginning. So what the heat pad is going to do is it's going to help heat the soil temperature, and it's going to raise that, and the soil temperature is going to warm up, and that's going to warm the seed, which aids in germination. So the first few weeks there, once it's germinating, you keep that heat pad on, and then after it's sprouted, you can still use the heat pad if you want, or you can slowly start to take that off. Either way, that will work as well. So I want to stop sharing my screen for a moment now. I'm going to do the demonstration. So bear with me for 1 second here. Let's bring this back up. I'm going to scooch this back a little bit. So the demonstration I'm going to show you guys is how to plant. So this is one of the seed trays. I got this out of a Jiffy starter kit that comes with 32 other seed starter pots there. So there's a little bit of a bigger one, but I'm just doing a small fraction to show you guys for time's sake. So you can take them out, and they're individual, and they're in 8, there's sets of 8. So the soil here is the soil that I showed previously in the bag. It's very dry. It's pretty brittle. So what I did for this is I soaked the seed starter overnight in water for a few days. So I put it just in a nice little container here and just kind of soaked it with water. So I didn't really use a specific ratio. I just kind of filled this and then added like about a cup or 2 of water and let that absorb. And the reason that I did that is the dry mixture there, if I put my seed in here and then I water it to moisten it, it's just going to cause all the water kind of to rise up to the top, and the seeds are just be swimming around there, which is not ideal. So I recommend you kind of soak it, and you can put them in pretty much any plastic container. You can just cover the top lightly with like a lid or some like plastic wrap, and they'll come into this nice, lot more earthier, more compact soil, which is really good. So when you have them, you're gonna take your tray, and I'm gonna do it down here real quick, and then I'll show you so I don't spill everywhere. So you're gonna pack them in there, and you wanna fill it up just up to the top of the seed starter kit. And if I was outside, you could just dump a lot more dirt in here. I just got 1 bag, and that should be enough for if you want to do 1 seed tray of 8. So I filled up about 1 with that. So we're going to cover that there. Perfect. Even that out. So I filled in some of the seeds here. So the one here is the dry one without the water, and this is the one that it's soaked. So it's got that nice hydrated color. So that's what you kind of want to watch for. And also when you're keeping them moist, if it starts to turn into this one, that's how you know you want to give it a nice little drink there. So you want to make sure, just try to keep it this color. And if it does get to this, don't worry, just water it again, keep it hydrated. So I'll be planting these peppers. So these are from Seed Savers. So always read the back of the seed packet. So I'll turn this around real fast. So they have some great information on there. And these are all going to be different depending on which variety you're going to grow and which vegetables you're growing. So it kind of tells you how soon to start it. So you want to start them about 8 weeks before the last frost. So I'll cover that on the next slide about the average frost dates around for our area. It tells you how many days it takes for them to germinate. So these ones should be germinating in about 14 days, give or take. So let's see here. So when I do plant them, I do like to include maybe 2 or 3 seeds per cell, not just one, because this will allow for a greater chance of them germinating. And you can also kind of thin them off. So once they've sprouted, you can kind of look at them and see which ones you like, which ones are the healthier ones. So they kind of have those thicker stems, that more vibrant color. So these are, it's kind of hard to see these. They're very little, tiny little pepper seeds. So little tiny ones. So you want to choose about 2 or 3 of them, and you're going to plant them at the depth that it recommends on the seed packet. So these, I think, were about a 1/4. So yeah, these are about a 1/4 inch deep there. So usually you can just use your finger, or you can just use a pencil, kind of put a little bit of the depth there, and you just drop the seeds in there, and then you're going to cover them up. So I put a nice little hole there, and I drop my seeds in there. And then you're going to cover them up, and then you could water them with a spray bottle, which I'm not going to do in this demonstration, but after that, you would fill this all up with your dirt, you'd put your seeds in, and you'd water it, and then you'd either put it under your grow light or in your south-facing window under the heat pad. So that is that demonstration. So I'm going to share my screen again. Share. Perfect. So when you're starting your seeds, ideally, you're going to want to start them in mid-March. So we're doing this webinar just a little bit on the earlier side. So you can kind of plan out what you want to plant. You can come in, check out what we have for the seeds and get all that mapped out. And like I said before, always read the seed packet. That's something I find very important because it's going to have all the useful information. So some easy seeds to start are lettuce, eggplant, and cucumber. These are very basic, easy growing, fast germinating seeds that you can grow. So the light, so using grow lights. So here we offer little clamp lights like this. So this kind of clamps on. So this is if you're kind of doing more of a smaller setup. If you are doing multiple trays on larger setups, you can use those long tube lights, and those will work just as well. So the amount of light for seedlings is going to be pretty high. And lighting in general for vegetables and anything edible is going to be considerably higher light than if you were for your indoor houseplants. So while your houseplants might be getting bright or indirect light, you're going to need to up the amount of light and time the seedlings get because they're still going through the growing process, and also they're going to be fruiting, which requires more energy as well. So lettuce needs around 15 hours of light, or you can put them in a south-facing window. Eggplants need around 13 hours of light for their growing, and then cucumbers need around 8. And then after they have kind of sprouted and germinated and gotten maybe 2 or 3 kind of good leaves on there, and it's usually around a month or 2, you can slowly start to decrease the hours on there. So you can go from 15 down to 12 or 13 hours. And for eggplants from 13 down to 11 or 10, you can slowly just decrease that. And that's going to slow their growing a little bit. And the reason that I would do that is you can make sure the weather outside is still kind of where you want it, because you don't want to plant them outside and then get hit with the frost or those cold temperatures. So this kind of just allows a little extra time, a little cushion wiggle room there for you to make sure temperatures outside are doing well. So moving on now, like I said, keep that soil moist, but not soggy. So really just keep that eye on it. If it's really wet when you touch it and kind of looking like soupy and puddly, then you don't want to let that dry out because that's getting way too wet. And then if it's that dry, brittle stuff, then you definitely want to give it a nice drink. So I recommend using a spray bottle. A lot easier to maintain that, and it won't cause the dirt to kind of pool up and rise if you do too much. So another issue with another step in that, is transplanting. So like I said before, when the seeds have sprouted and they get those 4 real sturdy leaves, then it's time for them to be transplanted. So you can either transplant them directly into the ground, into your raised beds, or before that, you can kind of transplant them into a little bit of a larger container and have them grow into that container and then transplant them outside. So when you are ready to transplant them outside, whether it's from the seed starting container or the next size up, you want to make sure you harden them off prior to transplanting. And hardening off is kind of a process that kind of allows them to acclimate to the outside weather, because when you're growing them inside, they have those nice climate controlled conditions, not really exposed to the elements. So if you put them right outside, they kind of get that initial shock, which is not good. So you want to harden them off. And the way that I harden off mine is I'll take these little seed trays here from the demonstration, and I'll put them in a nice little cardboard box, which allows me to move them easier. I'm going to set them outside for a week. So 1 day all the way up to 7 days. And on that first day, I'll put them in a nice kind of a sheltered spot that's still outside for an hour. And then day 2, I'll put them out there in that same spot for 2 hours, day 3, 3 hours, and then all the way up to 7. So by the time day 7 comes around, they've been outside for a total of 7 hours that day. And that after that week is up, you're ready to plant them directly into the ground. Now, if you want to take them out to plant them in when you're seeding and to put them into the newer container, like I said, this is kind of more of a delicate process because the root system is still going to be pretty vulnerable there. So I kind of like to use like either a butter knife or a spoon. You kind of dig it out a little bit. You don't want to pull it out with your hands. You want to kind of dig it up a little bit and then transplant that into the next container. So that's like usually a little bit bigger size up. So like I said, you sell the smaller ones, the little squares. You can put them probably into one, something like around that big, and that just allows them to grow a little bit more, and you can transplant them a lot easier. Excuse me for 1 second there. All right, perfect. So now we're going to talk about grow lights. So the grow light that I have here that I showed earlier is a nice little clamp light one. So there's different bulbs you can put in there. This one doesn't have a bulb in there at the moment, but you put your bulb in and you can clamp it on like this onto like a bookshelf or something, and kind of angle that down towards the seeds to provide the light. And these aren't going to heat up like your regular lights. These are going to be low heat source, but like bright lights. So the light's still gonna be bright, but the bulb's not gonna get hot like a regular lamp would. So you don't need to worry too much about that. And the different lights, so there's different bulbs. So this is kind of a blue one. There's different colors. They also come in reds and greens and other colors like that. And they'll have different purposes. So the one that I chose, the blue one here, is for starting for seeds. So right in that process of like germinating up to the seedlings. Then as they kind of age in seedlings, you can switch more to a different colored bulb as well. So that should kind of depend on the different companies' bulb colors. So the light requirements for plants are going to vary depending on each one. So lettuce and kale, they're going to need that moderate light, and then basil and thyme, the herbs, they're going to need a lot higher levels of light. So I just want to keep that in mind when you're choosing what kind of plants you want to grow and if you have the space for that. So also something to note on is how close you want to have them to the seed trays. So in the beginning, you want to keep them probably around like 3 inches away, so they're still getting that super bright light exposure. And then after the first month, you can kind of pull that light back to around like 6 inches, give or take. It doesn't need to be exactly, but you just want to kind of slowly pull that back so you get a wider range of light levels. And this is also too when you can keep the heat pad going. So the heat pad are going to look like this. This is more of a smaller one for like a single tray. They come in different sizes as well. So you just plug this one in. This one is just a simple one you plug in. It's going to raise the temperature probably about like 10 to 20 degrees, whatever their ambient room temperature is. I know there's a few other ones you can buy that have timers on them and you can control that stuff. But this is a nice little simple basic starting one. So if you just get started using heat pads, you can just use that one. And like I said, it warms the soil and helps them germinate. All right, so these are the products that I mentioned before. And like I said, you do have a sheet on there that will tell you the different products that I use. So you got the seed starter kit with the individual cells, Renee's Garden Seeds or Seed Saver Seeds, and also the Espoma Seed Starter Kit. So now we're going to move on to raised beds. So that was all the basic stuff for seeds. Now we're going to go into using raised beds. So why do you want to plant in raised beds? I think a benefit of raised beds is it reduces soil compaction, you have less weeds, and better access to it. So the importance of soil compaction is if you're in your regular garden, you're kind of trampling, you're stepping on it, you're smushing that soil down. And when you smush that, you're compacting the particles in there, and that's not letting it get enough oxygen. It's making it harder for the roots to kind of move out. So when you're using a raised bed, it kind of eliminates that because you're kneeling down, you're reaching in, so you're not compacting that soil. So it's allowing aeration and oxygen to flow within the soil. Less weeds. So like I said, if you didn't have the raised beds, if you're trying to pick weeds on the ground, they often kind of scatter the weeds when you touch them. So you can kind of like get blown in there. By raising it above the ground a few feet, you kind of help you manage your weeds a little better. Obviously, weeds are still going to get in from various forms, so it does decrease the ones from like you kind of bringing them in from the ground. And also for better access. So sometimes they don't kind of like bending over all the time they reach, or you want to put a raised bed that's kind of more up to like chest height, which is a lot easier to use that way. That's another benefit of it. So you're not always bending down and having to use the pane and getting like dirty in the garden that way. So what soil do you want to put in your raised bed? So here at Chalet, we have Chalet potting soil. You can kind of use that and you can mix in and add your adjustments to help with the soil. There's like fertilizers, compost, which will create more of a little bit of healthier soil. Or you can use Dr. Earth vegetable planting mix. So we sell it by the bag. So it kind of puts some measurements down there. So 10 1.5 bags will fill kind of a 4x4 raised bed. So it kind of gives you a nice little idea about how big the bags are. And that's going to be measured by cubic feet. So I think there might be a minor typo on there so it's not quarts, it's gonna be cubic feet. So it's an error on my part there. So moving on now, what creates healthy soil? So when looking at soil, there's many components to it. And you want to kind of add these, in my opinion, I like to add these to it can help create a healthier soil. So that's going to be some compost, which are going to be creating those beneficial bacteria and fungi, fertilizer, and then seedless, soilless growing mix. So these also kind of help with aeration, which also, like I mentioned before, is really good. So you don't want to have it compacted. The soilless kind of helps the water and the drainage and the roots pass through a lot easier, because if it's tough soil, the roots are going to have a harder time breaking through and getting down there, which is going to affect the life of the plant. So for these in the raised beds, like I said, you can have the plants that you start from seed and you can transplant them in, or if you choose not to start from seed, you can go right to your local garden center, come into Chalet, pick up the plants there. These are the ones that kind of come in those little black containers. So I know I've started them from seed. I've also gone into garden centers and picked my plants before too. So what you want to kind of look for are young, strong, not yet flowered plants. So they have those nice thick stems. They have a good color. They're standing up straight. They're not flopping over. I'm looking kind of rough, like those sad plants that you can see. So speaking of sad plants, it's something you want to avoid is like plants that are bending down. They're like that really dry stalk. They haven't been watered or maintained. They're spindly. They're kind of stretched out. Their leaves are kind of damaged, like you can see in the photo there. So just keep an eye out for there. And of course, if like one or two leaves on a plant are like kind of damaged and they have those on there, you can easily just take those off. This is more of like the whole plant is covered in that. You want to kind of avoid those and find the healthier ones. And then now this would also be the time to transplant your seeds. So this is of course after you've read the seed packet and you've seen the right time it is, it's germinated, sprouted, and you've reached that stage ready to plant it. You can plant them directly in the raised bed as well. So I mentioned hardening off again. Just put that container into a box, to make it easier to move in and out. And you do that for, like I said, an hour each day. So by the end of day 7, by the end of the week, you put them out there for a total of like 7 hours that day. All right, so some basic kind of raised bed plants that I've grown in the past are cucumbers, carrots, and peppers. So starting off the cucumbers, these got to be more like full sun. They like the sun, they like the heat in the summer. They're well-drained soil. I don't know why I put that on there. So I think I meant to put, you can use kind of like trellises and other supports for cucumbers. So it's kind of dependent on the variety of cucumbers that you are going to grow. So they have ones that like to climb. So that's why you can just use a little trellis and they'll climb up there and you can tie them on and use the growth on that way. Moving on to carrots, these guys also like to be in full sun. They can also tolerate partial shade. And they also kind of like that loose soil because they like to grow down. You pull them out there. And then peppers, these are like green peppers, red peppers, even hotter peppers too. Kind of like full sun, because you want to start these guys indoors due to their longer growing season. So just take note of that too when you're starting your seeds, is to like monitor how long it's going to take them to grow inside. And these are heat sensitive as well. Excuse me. So you want to make sure the temperatures outside are kind of in that range. And you also, the way that you can combat heat sensitivity is you want to make sure you're watering them and giving them enough water and they're hydrated well. Swiss chard and rosemary are 2 other ones I kind of like to grow. So these guys are full sun, part shade as well. I like the soil to be well drained. If the Swiss chard is kind of growing a little bit bigger, you can always prune and cut that guy back, which will allow it to grow. You can grow better and have better control over it. And then rosemary is a full sun herb, likes the well drained soil. Just kind of be careful with these guys not to overwater them. So just kind of keep your eye on them, keeping them moist. But if they are kind of looking a little bit different, you can probably overwater them. So kind of tone that back and just kind of watch that. You can grow these guys in the ground or in a container. And it's a general note of planting herbs in your garden. Just be careful. So herbs like mint, I know I planted one year, they kind of exploded and took over my whole garden. So now I just grow them in a container. It's a little bit more of a controlled environment. So just keep an eye on that when you choose what kind of herbs you want to put in your garden so they don't kind of spread and take over. So how to plant. So say you've come home from the garden center with all your plants and you're ready to plant them into your raised bed or into the ground or in containers. It also applies to as well. You want to check for the last frost date, so the average one. So around here, it's usually around May 15th, but with weather these days, you're really not sure. So give or take a few days after May 15th, you can be ready to start planting them. So for transplants, you want to take them out of that plastic container. So sometimes they kind of get stuck in there. There's usually like the square ones, so I like to kind of squeeze the edges of the container and then gently pull from like grasping of the stem by the base of the dirt and just kind of pull out, and that leaves you with a nice little root ball. I like to kind of massage the roots on the bottom, break that apart gently, so when you plant them, it allows for a little bit more of a more growth action there. So if you dig your hole, you usually just want to do the size of however big that root ball is, so it kind of sits nice and fits evenly on there. And then you want to apply fertilizer. So you want to follow the packages, follow the instructions on the package of the fertilizer. So I like to put a little bit on the bottom of the hole, and then after I've covered it, I like to put a little bit on the top, so you top dress that as well. So put your fertilizer in, you can put your plant in, cover with soil, reapply a little bit of fertilizer. And the reason you got to do this is when you water them or it gets water from the rain, it kind of soaks it up and absorbs downwards. So it kind of hitting the top, and also the fertilizer in the bottom will also be activated. So the roots down there can also be getting the benefits from the fertilizer. And of course, water the new plants in. Make sure this is a big step there, is watering those new plants. And generally, if you can, you want to try to plant them more on a cloudier day so they kind of get used to that new environment there. So now touching on composting, this is one of the amendments that you can make to having healthier soil. So why do you want to compost? It helps build up the soil, helps beneficial bacteria and fungi grow, and it also creates humus, which is that big topic of making soil looser with long aeration. So like I said many times before, helping those roots grow. So the two types of compost that you can use are either store-bought or homemade. So if you kind of go the store-bought route, this is a lot less labor intensive. You don't have to have that pile in your yard. You just go buy that bag of it and you can apply it that way. You don't have to worry about saving your food scraps and having that big process going. So at Shell, we sell two different ones, the Shell Cottonburr compost. This compost is kind of a mix of the stems, the seeds, and the leaves of the cotton plant, which is really good. And sometimes you can also find little fragments of cotton in there. It's kind of fun thing to keep your eye out for. And we also cover the Chalet organic compost. This is kind of your regular compost, but the vegetable scraps, that kind of stuff, not the discarded cotton plants. You just apply this the same way, kind of mix into the soil, apply a little bit. It kind of depends on how big your space is going to be. So keep that in mind when you're buying bags and how much you want to put into your garden. The homemade route, this kind of takes a little bit more time and is a little bit more, you need to put a little more time and effort into this one. So it's kind of more of a little bit of a hobby. Is either you want to use a pile or a bin in a kind of a shady spot. So if you just want to do it right on top of the ground there. If you do want to have something to cover it, you can use kind of like a little layer of straw, but otherwise just putting it right on top of the bare earth there. So you kind of want to go for. If you don't want to put it in your yard like that, you can use a bin, also in a shady spot, so it kind of takes out the looking of the compost pile just sitting in your yard. So you can kind of get a nice little bin that turns it for you, so you don't have to worry about using a shovel or kind of a rake to move that around. So when you do composting, you kind of want to start collecting your food scraps, and you kind of take those from the inside. And instead of having to take a trip out every day, you can use a little compost caddy like this, which has a little filter on the lid there, which opens up so when you are trying to do it, it doesn't kind of stink up the house or anything. So this allows you to put your food scraps in there. Then you can kind of carry them out at the end of the week. So the things that you want to do compost, you can hear a lot about browns and greens. So starting off with the browns, these are more of your drier things, kind of what's known as the dries. This kind of like cardboard, pine needles, paper, that kind of stuff. And then you move into greens, which everyone thinks about composting, like your vegetable scraps, fruit scraps, coffee grounds. And these are kind of what's known as the wet part of composting. So when you're kind of starting your pile, you want to alternate starting with the browns in the bottom, and then you can add greens and just do browns, greens with your pile there. And this is going to take probably a few months, only from like probably I say 2 or 3 months all the way up to 6 months, kind of depending on the temperature and how well it's breaking down and how much you're maintaining it. So you want to turn the pile after the first week. So like every 7 to 10 days, you want to turn that, and turning that kind of helps stimulate the growth there. It kind of helps it heat up. And the reason that your compost pile is going to be heating up is because the bacteria breaking things down, and it's in the process of breaking it down. And if it's not heating up, it's kind of producing kind of like a bad smelly odor, like a landfill. And you want to reassess your ratio of browns and greens. I've heard some people have used ratios of 2 to 1, so 2 greens to 1 browns, or 1 to 1 brown to green. Just kind of through trial and error, you can figure out what kind of works for you and what you kind of like. Things you want to avoid putting in the compost pile are kind of like meat scraps, fish bones, lard, grease, any of that kind of smelly stuff, which will kind of attract more creatures to your compost pile. It's not a really good thing you want to get into. So like I said, keeping it warm, heat is your friend, and it's heating up due to the bacterial breakdown. And if it's not heating up, it's pretty easy fix. Like I said, just monitor your ratio and kind of see, am I putting in more browns or not enough greens? Am I not keeping it wet? Have I not gotten it moist? Have I not been turning it? So those are the kind of things you want to kind of keep in mind when you are doing it. Also, if you do want to add some other things to help aid the composting and make it faster, we have this little Spoma composting mix. And this also is you can apply a cup of it or 3 cups. It's going to depend on how big your pile is. So it has measurements on the back, but you kind of want to sprinkle that on top of your layers each time you do that. And that's going to kind of help with the breakdown. In addition to breaking it down faster, if you kind of want to speed it up, you can also kind of shred it. So you see in this picture here, they kind of been shredded. So you can shred your scraps. That also help it kind of speed up. But if you don't shred it, that's fine as well. Just make sure you're turning it and you're applying moisture and it's heating up right. And then probably in like I said, 2 to 6 months, it'll be ready. And you kind of know it's ready and it's on the right track. So it kind of gives you that warm, kind of earthy smell. It's not that good earthy smell. It's not the smell, like I said, of a landfill. All right, so now we're gonna move into kind of containers. So this is if you kind of want to garden in your apartment or you kind of have a balcony or you just want to grow them on your front porch, you can grow them in containers. So you want to kind of avoid are smaller containers. So small containers are kind of constricting the roots. It's not going to allow the plant to kind of grow to its fullest there. And also smaller containers are going to dry out a lot faster than larger containers are, depending on the temperatures. So they may need to be watered once or twice a day, depending on the weather conditions. So like I said, this is kind of going to vary depending on where you put them, how much sun they're getting, and the temperatures they're receiving during that day. So if it's like 90 degrees and raining outside, obviously it's still going to be hot, but it's still getting adequate water. But if it's like 90 degrees and not raining, definitely keep it on your soap. It's going to be drying out a lot quicker due to the heat that's getting. And also wind is a big factor. Wind can also dry out containers. So just kind of keep an eye on that and watch that. Some seeds are actually specifically designed for containers. I know there's some seed brands here that you can show that kind of show like a container on the seed packet, and that is also showing that it's designed for containers. But just double check the labels when you are buying your seeds, and they should be able to help you fill in if this is good for containers or not. And usually you're going to want to have around 5 hours of sun minimum for growing plants in containers. Obviously, like lettuce, beets, carrots, those guys, they can require a lot less sun and also be grown in the shade. So it's just going to depend on which varieties you're growing. So some ones that grow well in pots are beans, determinate tomatoes. So determinate tomatoes, in the tomato field, there's determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. So indeterminate ones are going to be ones that are growing a lot taller. Determinate ones are going to be the bush, kind of growing on smaller scales. So make sure when you are growing containers that you use the determinate tomatoes so that they are specifically structured for containers. Lettuce and radishes are also really good ones to grow in containers. So what do you need? You want to kind of use the right size container. So you can either use like plastic or terracotta. We have some pretty good plastic containers here. Kind of like this. This guy's a little bit of a smaller one. I would use, but just for the sake of Zoom, I'm showing a smaller one so it shows up on camera. But you want to plant your plants in those containers there. You can also kind of repurpose different things around your home for growing in containers. I know my father and I like to use, you order wine, you can use the wine crates, and we'll put little foots on the edge of the wine crates so it's lifted up, and then you reinforce the bottom with probably 1 or 2 other smaller wooden beams, and this kind of helps so the soil doesn't kind of come out the bottom, and you just fill it up with the soil mix. And we usually grow herbs in this, so like basil, thyme, rosemary, mint. We'll grow those in the box, usually on our front porch. So it's kind of a nice thing you can use. You can also just use any other type of like box or tray that will hold dirt and have adequate drainage. Also, you want to use some soilless potting mix. So in the raised beds, you can use the regular garden soil there. They recommend that's gonna be a lot heavier, but the soilless one for containers is it's a lot lighter, has better aeration. Also, if you want to kind of move your pots around, it's a lot easier for you to pick those up and move to different spots. So keep that in mind when you're growing with soilless when you're using containers. Also, how to manage overgrown plants. So when you're growing containers, I know sometimes the tomatoes kind of get pretty unruly. They start growing every which way and they're growing out a lot. So you can thin those down, and you want to kind of prune them back. So if they're growing too tall, trim with the top nodes. You kind of find like the top stalk and then go down to the next set of leaves. You can kind of prune it that way and just pinch that off. Very similar to pinching herbs. So basil and thyme, same thing applies. If they're growing too vigorously for your container and you want to kind of bring them back in, you can prune the tops of those off and just kind of pinch them and just prune them off there. Also, when you do pinch, sometimes it will cause them to kind of grow faster and grow more profusely. So just kind of also keep that in mind. It's kind of a common thing you want to do is always prune them if you want to keep them a certain size. So every few weeks, just check that growth on there. So moving into some basic gardening care. So touching on pruning again, tomatoes, pretty easy to prune. So in the picture here, I'm not sure if you guys can see my cursor, but the picture there, you have the tomatoes, you have the stem, and then you kind of have the growths off shooting off to the sides, to the left and right, and they have the leaves on the end. The section between the growth and the stems, so right in this little spot, these little suckers here, you want to prune those off so they don't promote new branches. You just kind of pinch those off. You can either use pruners or you can just use your hands and just pinch them right off. Basil, thyme, and tarragon are some other herbs that you can also pinch. So now moving on to weeds. So everyone who's ever gardened kind of has to be managing weeds. So it's not really about how you completely get them out and completely eradicate. It's more about how you can actively manage them, because there's always an uphill battle with these. So what can increase your likelihood of weeds in your garden? That's that soil compaction. If you're trampling those beds, you don't have really good drainage in there, and the soil is constantly like soggy, wet, and moist. There's a difference between keeping it moist and wet for the growing purposes and having it being over wet. And that's when the weeds are going to kind of be prone to growing in there. So some common weeds that I found are bindweed and the Canada thistle. So bindweed is kind of more of a viney one that kind of wraps it around. And this guy is really hard to get rid of because it has a really good root system, and it's really hardy. So once it kind of sets in, you have to actively monitoring that. But the best way to prevent that is just kind of pulling it earlier, kind of catching it. It looks very similar to morning glory. So be careful that if you do like morning glory, you don't pull that, but kind of pull those weeds. The thistles, those are those really spiny ones that you kind of grab on and really prick your fingers. I know they grow all over my yard, so I kind of like to pick and pull those before they get too big. If you're using gloves, they're pretty easy to pull, but if you don't have gloves on, or if you are using gloves, there's a small segment kind of like this is the soil line, and the stem's kind of sticking up there, kind of towards the base. It's a little section on the weeds there that is a lot less prickly than the rest of the plant. So you can kind of pinch that and you can pull that out, which makes it a lot easier and safer on your hands. So you're not getting poked and pulling those little thistles out all the time and getting annoyed. So you can easily pull those out. Some natural ways, the best way is easily just to pick them by hand. I kind of avoid using herbicides in those ones because you are growing edible plants and you really don't want to use those and risk getting those sprayed on the plants. So I just kind of avoid those in general when I am gardening. Otherwise, you can use kind of a little mixture of vinegar in the spray bottle. So you just kind of spray the vinegar on there. Although this actively won't like kill the plant because it won't kill the root system. It'll kind of kill the leaves and the stems and take care of it that way. So you can pull it out afterwards. So some pests and diseases. So when you are gardening, you're going to run into some bugs, a lot of creatures and that kind of stuff are living in the soil to help the ecosystem. It's Mother Nature. Some common pests that I find in my yard are these Japanese beetles. So those little bronze colored beetles probably like around like that big. They're really annoying. They kind of eat your leaves. They kind of congregate and they always come in like the groups and they'll take it over. Aphids, these little like green little bugs, and then slugs, which take on the soil. So some really good ways to combat these. Like the picture on the left, there's a tomato and vegetable spray. So we got one of these guys here. And this, you want to make contact with the bugs when you spray it on there. You want to apply it on there. This also kills a bunch of other insects as well. So besides aphids, it covers like mites, spider mites, crickets, ants, silverfish. So tons of like any bugs in your garden. Just check the label on this, but it's got quite an extensive list on the back of things that it covers. It also is used for fungal diseases as well. So you can spray this. It also works just on regular plants. So it doesn't have to be an edible vegetable plant. If you have other plants that have these infestations on them, feel free to use this as well. So moving on to some diseases. So leaf spot and powdery mildew. Leaf spots, when you see the leaves that have those little spots on there, kind of looks like little rings on there. So you want to keep an eye out for that. That can also be treated by spraying either the tomato and vegetable or the fungal here. So you want to coat this too. So give it a nice little coating on the leaf so it's coated kind of fully around. This also works on vegetables, fruit trees, flowers, and shrubs. And it's ready to use. So just read the label before applying, but that's another good one that you can use. So managing them, you want to kind of keep an eye on them. It's easier to stop them in the beginning instead of just letting go. So if you start seeing the bugs in there, definitely just pick them off whenever you go out. If they're Japanese, you just kind of pick them and just throw them off or apply the spray. And this is a lot easier for them to kind of stop so that it doesn't get out of hand later on. So here are the products again. Like I said, it controls insects, aphids, mites, beetles, and then the fungal for controlling diseases like leaf spot, mildew, and then scab. So thank you guys very much. Now I can check the chat for any questions you guys have. And also feel free to contact the hello@shelleynursery.com. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, feel free to come on and email that. And if you have any questions about the products, be happy to take care of that for you. So give me 1 second there. So I want to pull up the chat here. So there's also the chat and there's also the Q&A section as well. So I'm going to monitor both of those real quick. So, all right, so we're not seeing that. If I have grow lights, so I still need to put the seeds near a window. If you have a grow light, you do not need to still put them by the window. If you would like to kind of supplement between like the window light and the growth light, at different times you can do that. But if you have just a single grow light, you can use that and you don't need to worry about putting them by the window. Let's see here. Same process for herbs. I'm assuming that's talking about growing lights. Yeah, so herbs are really good for growing lights. Like I said, they require a little bit more light than regular vegetables would. So just kind of look at online or the back of the seeds and books about how many hours your herbs are going to need and supply the light and set the timers on that. How much organic matter did you add to the soil for a raised bed? That is a good question. So I can get back to you on that one, but I do know it's going to kind of depend on how big your raised bed is. So if it's a large one, you obviously have to use larger ratio. But I will email you back some answer for that one, Sherry. How do you prevent dampening off of seedlings? Jen and Jen, I have to also get back to you on that one of the dampening off. If you are talking about kind of like the humidity and keeping it too moist, just kind of keep an eye on the soil there. You can start to let it dry. So you definitely just look at the soil color. So like I said, if it's that rich dark color, that means it's pretty damp, it's pretty wet, and like the dry stuff there is too dry. So kind of keep it in between super soggy and not too dry. So just keep it in there. What do you do to the soil for carrots to make it loose soil? The loose soil, that's kind of part of the aeration. So that's in the soil mix here that I have for the seed starter. I think it's got perlite, sphagnum moss, yucca extract, and microtone. So these are all things that kind of add to the creating the soil to keep it looser, helping with drainage. And I also know the microtone, that's not really more for drainage. That's more of a mycorrhizas. That's more beneficial, like bacteria and fungi on there. So yeah, any tips for handling very small seeds when planting? Let's see. I don't think I have it with me, but there's a tool that we have here. Kind of looks more like a thermometer almost. It's kind of got a little circle on there, and you can control like how many seeds you want. So you put that in there, kind of like an eyedropper, and they can put like 3 or 4 seeds in there, and then it'll plant that directly in there. So you can easily pick them off with your hand gently and put them in there, and then that'll help you plant them a lot easier. But yeah, PB, that's a good question. I always have those little tiny seeds in your hand. You're always trying to count exactly how many there are. If you do like put more than 3 in there, that's fine. You can just easily just pick them off after they kind of sprouted and choose kind of the healthiest ones out of the mix. And there's nothing wrong with putting 4 or 5 seeds per little cell in there. Oh, what is soilless growing mix? So soilless growing mix is kind of a mix of like I said, like the yucca, like I covered here before. It's just yucca extract, peat moss, sphagnum moss. So just like those mosses, they allow it to be a lot easier and for soil and water for water to pass through easier. I have a hydroponic veg system with tiny black gnats growing food. So what can I do to control these pests? Donna, I'll email you some steps you can take to get rid of those. So, but hydroponic, that's pretty cool. That's another good thing, which I didn't touch on. Well, that's just growing stuff without soil and using water. How do I know if a pot is food safe? I think if you mean like to eat out of or just for growing, you can pretty much use any pot for growing. I kind of just like to wash it off with water a little bit before you put that dirt in, and that kind of will get rid of that stuff. But if you're growing it in there, I don't think it's been exposed to any of those like toxic chemicals like that people have sprayed on there, it should be good to go for you to plant in. Can you put plants out earlier if the raised bed is covered? If yes, how early? So Jen and John, I'll get back to you on the how early part, but yeah, if it is covered, I assume you're speaking kind of like a little greenhouse or like a little hoop house. Those will help with the temperatures and the humidity, keeping humidity in there. So yes, you can put them out a little earlier. So I will get back to you too within a few days with an answer for how early to set that out. What is the best way to cut herbs to promote later growth? So you can use like scissors or your hand, and that's kind of like, once I'd say probably the plant's probably about around that big there. That's usually when I prune mine. is that prune like kind of the stems, and I'll take that down probably this much down to the next set of leaves, and I'll pinch that off and I'll cut that, and then they'll kind of grow up bigger that way and kind of explode in the growth more that way. So there's that chat there. I'll minimize that. And the Q&A. When you get to container, what is the size? What size container works best for the diameter? Let's see, the one that I showed here, this says probably around 11 or an 8-inch pot here. This is an 11.8-inch geopot plastic one. So this guy, if you're kind of growing small crops, like kind of like lettuce or beets, you can use this. But if you want to go bigger, it's probably like maybe 12 or 13 for those larger plants like tomatoes or tomatillos. That size work, but it's always bigger is better with regards to the transplants. Now, if you're taking your seedlings and planting them in there, I'd wait till your seedlings are a little bit more, a little bit more developed. So like I said, after you kind of, there's a step you can take from switching them out from, once you take them from this step into a kind of a next size up individual growing container, I'd let them grow in that for a little bit longer, so they kind of nice little height there, and then transplant them to the bigger containers so they're not as stressed when you transplant them. Oh, would you please clarify when to remove the heat pad? So for the heat pad, I use that on when they germinate. So after they kind of sprouted, probably I'd say 2 or 3 leaves on there. And probably like around that, they can kind of remove the heat pad that way. And if you want, if it's one of those heat that provides a little bit minimal heat, you kind of keep it all the way up until you transplant them, because they like the soil to be nice and warm. So that's a big thing you want to have going, is keeping that heat pad, keeping that soil warm. But after they germinate, you can easily just take them off. Take that off the heat pad if you'd like. Just try to keep them away from those windows to get the cold drafts, anything like that. So try to keep them away from cold temperatures. Share, I'll answer you more about the organic matter in an email, so I'll send you a little bit more information on that. What do you do to the soil for carrots to make it loose? Covered that. You covered soilless growing mix. Mary, I'll get back to you on why they're always turning yellow there. There's probably a few answers for why that could be, so I'll email you that as well. So how does the heat pad work? Let me see where I put that. So this guy here, this, like I said, is a very simple one. I know there's ones you can buy a little bit bigger and wider that have timers, but this guy, you can really just plug this into a wall. It's got a nice little long cord. And you want to just kind of put that down. So you want to put it flat like this. So it'll be resting on your table like this. And then you take your seed trays, so you like this, or the plastic ones, and put that on top there. It's going to kind of heat that. The heat's going to come out of this, and it's going to start to raise the bottom of the soil temperature, radiating the heat upwards. And it does take a few days for that soil to heat up. So the first few days, if your soil is like not getting warm or it's not heating up, don't worry about that. And you can measure the temperature with a soil thermometer, so you can measure it that way. Why should you put a compost bin in the shade? The direct sun on the compost there is really not ideal for it there. So like shady spot, you can easier control the moisture so it doesn't evaporate as much water there. But I'll email you some more, Pam and Chuck, some more information on composting bins and the reasons why you put them in shades. Why can't you use Pro-T veggies from critters? Thus not understanding what Pro-T veg is, but I can reach out to you and cover more about that. You can clarify more about that one. So I apologize for not knowing what Pro-T for veg is there. Should you heat the soil before? No, you don't need to heat the soil before you sow the seeds. You can sow the seeds and start the heat pad the same day. That is fine. If you want to start heating it up before then, I don't see any reason why not to, but I haven't done that in the past. So you just put the heat pad down at the same time after you've planted them. So I think I'll check the chat over here one more time. All right. Thank you very much. So sorry about that. For the herbs for sheared with scissors or to be pinched, you can do both. It does not. You can use like little horticulture pruners as well. It's more personal preference with that. Should I use a fan to harden off the seedlings? For hardening off, I just recommend, like I said, putting them outside. You can use a fan once the seeds have kind of grown a little bit bigger. I have read online that you can use a fan to help them, which I forget what it does, but I remember reading something about using a fan to help them on the early seeding process. Oh, protect plants from critters outside. Thank you for clarifying that. What can you use to protect? So you can use kind of like those little tomato, if you're growing tomatoes, you can use those little cages there. You can put those in the ground there. But you can kind of use a nice little fence there I'll do a little more research for you, Phyllis, on things you can use to protect, and I'll get back to you on that. Thank you for the nice comment, Marion. So that looks like all the questions that we have. If you guys think of anything else, if you have any comments, the hello@chalet email address, you can send that to you. So I appreciate that. And thank you for coming to my first webinar and look forward to seeing you guys all here in Chalet. So thank you and have a good day and stay healthy.